The following was originally presented at the Loop Earplugs invited event at their headquarters in Antwerp, Belgium. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's a pleasure to talk with you both now and afterwards. My name's Andrew Bellavia. I've been involved in audio in one form or another for most of my career. Most recently, I was at a company called Knowles in the Hearing Health Tech Division. Today, I'm going to share my view of where I think hearable devices are going, largely with respect to hearing, because after all, this is a hearing and listening based company, but also in other areas as well, a lot of things merging together to form true lifestyle earbuds that people will use every day. Now, when we think about advanced hearable devices, this is something we've talked about for a long, long time. I mentioned Bragi before. When did they release? 2015, I think, with a heart rate sensor and an onboard music player. Really the first company to aim at this sort of device that went beyond just streaming music. But we've had the problem, they had the problem, and the problem has existed to the present day that you're juggling too many different technical challenges without the capability to solve them. That includes battery life and comfort relation. In other words, if the battery life is too short, you have to put in a larger battery, they get larger and more uncomfortable, or you have to reduce the feature set in order to make them small enough to be comfortable. And also a lot of people are talking about advanced applications like biometric sensing within the ear, way ahead of actual consumer demand. So all of these things have more or less resulted in, I would say, except for a couple of areas, like ANC, for example, a pause in real innovation in hearable devices. But in the meantime, there have been a lot of developments going on, and I think that sort of logjam, that freeze in true innovation is about to end, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If we look at the present day right now, true wireless earbuds, hearable devices, are mainly used for consumption. Now this is the latest Qualcomm State of Play report where they do a survey in multiple countries on how people use their wireless devices. And if you look, all the popular use cases are all consumption based or calls. So either listening to audio for some purpose, whether it's music or video, or you're calling someone via internet meeting or on the phone itself. Because all the use cases have been situational, this has been in part why you haven't seen a lot of real innovation. Because if you think of things like biometrics, it really requires long wear before you get truly useful information out of biometric sensors in an earbud. And so you have both the technical challenges in making an earbud that you can wear for a large portion of the day comfortably, and you also have the present use cases are all built around short-term wear. Watch a movie, 2 hours, right? Listen to some music, hour, hour and a half, something like that. So this has been, the whole ecosystem is built around situational use. Battery life, you see, is more or less stabilized around 5-6 hours. You've seen some additional features creep in, but there hasn't been a drive really to make longer and longer battery life until the present time. Now we're going to talk about hearing in true wireless earbuds and all the hearing related features that are coming. To do that, I want to step back just a little bit and go back to studies that were done 90 years ago. I see a couple of heads nodding. You've seen this before. Two people at Bell Labs, Fletcher and Munson, studied how people perceive loudness, because your ears are not perfectly flat and linear. And so what you see on the very bottom curve there, that's your threshold of hearing. That's the quietest sound you can hear, okay? Now, if you look, your ears are most sensitive in the mid-range. And that kind of makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. That's where people's voices are, the sounds of predators, that sort of thing. They didn't really need really strong bass because prehistoric man didn't have rock bars. And so you see, if you look at low bass, your ears are like 40 dB less sensitive to low bass at very low levels. As you get up there, your ear response levels off. So if you listen at 90 dB, it all sounds pretty flat. But at low levels, not so much. The bass, you were way less sensitive to bass and less sensitive to a lesser extent to the treble. Now, who remembers the loudness button on stereo gear? Raise your hand if you remember the loudness button on stereo gear. Now, when I was 18, we had a lot of fun with the loudness button. Right? You turn the volume way up so the glasses on your shelf are rattling, and then you hit the loudness button. Yes! But that's not what it was for. The loudness button was for boosting the bass and sometimes the treble also when you were listening at low volumes, because if you didn't do that, the music sounded thin. Now, one ill effect of that, of the way your ears work, is that people tend to listen at higher volume levels because it sounds better. It really does. 90 years ago, it was proven that your music sounds better at loud volumes than it does at quieter volumes. And so that actually has implications when you talk about hearing loss from listening and hearing protection. It's also, people tend to mix music at those kind of volume levels because they expect you to listen at those kind of volume levels, and it all sounds very good. Now, there are actually companies who are taking advantage of this or accounting for it, actually, and this has implications when you're talking about earbuds to protect your hearing more than to destroy it. This is Yamaha, and you can see how they're representing it. When they show the bars go up to the top, that's representing music at high volume levels, and as you lower the volume level, you see the response change, and they fill it in. So in other words, what they're doing is they're making a system that automatically boosts the bass and the treble if you reduce the volume. It's a brilliant feature that discourages you, or at least doesn't encourage you, to listen at very high levels. I expect to see this in more and more earphones going forward. Now let's talk about age-related hearing loss. Nobody wants to talk about age-related hearing loss because it's age-related, and there's a stigma that goes with it, but it's also a biological fact of life. I'm a distance runner. Well, if you go look at my race times over the last few decades, they're not getting any faster either. It's just a fact of life. There isn't a lot of stigma around aging distance runners, but there's a lot more stigma around age-related hearing loss. But it's still worth talking about because it has a good deal to do with what you're working on here. If you look, the bass response doesn't change over time. It's the treble response that's affected. Look at the curve in the bottom, the light blue one or the orange one, the average listening level of a younger person. It's basically the Fletcher-Munson curve. But as you get older, the treble response gets worse. This is showing the hearing threshold. In other words, it has to get louder and louder until you can actually hear a sound. And so it gets to the point where you see when you're, somewhere in your 50s or older, you're even dipping into that mid-range. And that's why as you get older, you have a harder time hearing people in a restaurant or focusing on different sounds in a restaurant. So Stephen had given a good description of it. Your brain and hearing, it's really the most complicated sense because you can pick out a sound. For example, I'm talking to my companion on the other end of this table. If my hearing is good, I can turn my attention to a person talking behind me without ever turning around, and I can focus on that person. And then I can switch my focus back to the person across the table. And so when you start to lose that treble response for just the reasons Stephen said, you have all the different frequencies coming at your head from one direction or another. The time it takes the different frequencies to reach each ear in the amplitude variation from one ear to the other is what makes your brain be able to focus on any spot in space. When your mid-range starts to go like this, you lose that ability too. And that's why one of the first signs of age-related hearing loss is inability to hear people in a noisy restaurant. I'm going to put it around backwards. This is the way audiologists look at it. They look at change of hearing thresholds. So a young person on the green line, basically flat, and you see the hearing thresholds changing more and more as you get older. Now the thing is, when people look at this, if you want to have better sounding music even though your treble has rolled off in your ears, you don't actually EQ all this. It'll sound terrible if, for example, you're 50 years old and you boost 12 kilohertz by 30 dB, it'll sound awful. You don't actually have to EQ for this whole thing. You only have to EQ enough to get those back up above the hearing threshold again. Because let's say you're even listening at a perfectly reasonable level of 80 dB, you're not going to hear all the treble unless you boost it up a bit, but you only have to boost it up a bit. Now, people don't necessarily understand this, and so they don't know how to compensate for it. They might tweak around with their EQ and get it just so, but when you're talking about a hearable device in which you want to maximize sound quality, you have to do something more than that. And I'm going to use an example. It was done for unrelated purposes, but it makes a great example here. When I was at Knowles, they developed a preferred listening curve. Now, some of you probably know the Harman curve. And the Harman curve actually focused on the bass mid-range relationship. Now, one of the secrets of the Harman curve was that they actually studied only up to 10 kilohertz. And that's because the ear couplers, the measurement couplers they used at the time, stopped being accurate above 10 kilohertz. And if you actually read their original reports in the AES, they actually show that they only accounted for up to 10 kilohertz. And yet they published a curve with a diving treble, and everybody took that to be part of the curve. What happened at Knowles was we were doing hybrid two-speaker systems for earbuds. People were getting great reviews and tremendous sales. Were all dialing in more treble than the Harman curve had, and we wanted to understand why. So we actually, in cooperation with them, we actually used the same system of study. It was subjective to find people's listening preference, except focusing on the treble instead of the bass. So it kept the Harman curve up until the treble, and then did preferential studies for more or less treble. And this was the baseline preferred listening curve. You might have seen it around. For example, Brent Butterworth, who's a pretty well-known audio reviewer, just wrote about it not too long ago, long after I left. But one key thing that's important here is that Knowles also studied the preferred treble for people who had age-related hearing loss. And this is the result. What they found, and I should step back and say what they did was they grouped people into 4 age buckets. Now, some people, they always wore their Loop Earplugs at concerts and so on, and their hearing was better than their age would indicate. They would be put in a younger bucket. And some people, let's say me, didn't behave so well and ended up in an older age bucket. So these are apparent age buckets, not real age buckets. But the end result, what you see is, for every 10 years of apparent age increase, hearing age increase, if you will, people preferred 3 dB more treble. So you see, it didn't take EQing the whole curve. You didn't boost the treble by 30 dB. You just boosted it by 3, 9, or 12. Not so much. And if I go back to the hearing thresholds, you can see how little that is. Okay, so it doesn't take much treble boost when you're listening at, say 80 dB, perfectly safe level. Even if you're a person on the highest age line, you're only getting 9 dB more treble, and you're having the audio that sounds best to you. Now, as I said, your average consumer doesn't know or understand all this. Many people don't know how to get the equalizer in their phone. They just want better music quality. And this is one of the things that's now coming to hearable devices that's more and more popular, is sound personalization. So this is one company who started on it early, and what they're doing essentially is having you take a hearing test, and then instead of correcting the microphones like a hearing aid, they're correcting your music streaming. So they're doing it for you automatically. Just simply take the hearing test and let them customize the sound. And you get better sound quality to account for age-related hearing loss. So this is another feature that in the present state of hearable devices is more and more possible. And many companies are now doing this. Now, sound quality isn't just related to music. We do a lot of things with our earbuds, like internet meetings, for example. But there are real negative effects if you can't hear well during an internet meeting. And I'll show you a study that illustrates this. So in this study, what they did was they took a group of people, half of whom had good hearing and half of whom had hearing loss. And they screened them to make sure they didn't have any cognitive issues. Then they gave them a test in which a group of words was read, and then they had to recall those words roughly 30 minutes later. And I should say that they actually gave the test visually first to screen for any issues, and in the visual test, people from both groups came out about the same. But when they did the test with hearing, they didn't correct the audio for people with hearing loss. And what you see is people with hearing loss could not recall the words nearly as well as people with good hearing. And then they did something really interesting. They actually flipped it. So if you had hearing loss, they gave you corrected audio, and if you didn't have hearing loss, they simulated hearing loss in the audio you heard. The results were flipped backwards. So you could see that the inability to hear well caused the decline in ability to recall the words. And what that means in practical life is you're on internet meetings, especially if you have a day full of internet meetings, if you can't hear well, you're going to have a harder time staying engaged, understanding what was said, participating in the conversation. That can actually really be a detriment to your career. And so to have earbuds that are able to correct for your hearing response really means a lot in this context. Now, it wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about noise-induced hearing loss as well. As you can see, noise-induced hearing loss can be a lot more severe than age-related hearing loss. That red curve at the bottom is actually one of my ears because I didn't wear my earplugs in, rock bars and concerts. And so when you look at this sort of thing, I think this is key to what the future of hearable devices look like. How do you mitigate the effects of living in a loud world? I mean, going to concerts is one thing, and you can wear earplugs when you go to concerts. What about daily life? What about daily life? And what about listening to music, for that matter? So if we look where people tend to listen to music, earbuds will typically run 100 to 105 dB when you max them out. Now, this scale is from NIOSH, that's the US government organization, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. I know the European standard's slightly different, but very similar. And so it shows if you listen at 100 dB through your earbuds, your safe dosage is only 15 minutes. People tend to talk about 85 dB a lot because that's dosage at 8 hours. Okay, 8 hours at 85 dB would be the limit. You actually have to account for the total dosage. So if I listen at 85 for 8 hours and I'm exposed to 105 dB jackhammer for 15 minutes, it's way bad. Total dosage over time matters. Now, how this plays out in people's actual lives is illustrated by a pretty detailed measurements done on the New York metro system. The people who created this study went all over the New York metro system and measured noise levels. The average on a metro car underground was 95 dB. Now, okay, if you're listening with earbuds, ordinary earbuds, you will tend to listen 13 dB above the noise level. I saw 2 studies that came with the same target, just by letting people listen and then measuring how loud they were listening. 13 dB above the noise level. And to make things even worse, there are still people who write reviews saying this is a good thing. A couple of years ago, this review that you see on the bottom there actually talked about how you could drown out the noise with these earbuds, right? That's just crazy. That's really crazy. But now let's take ANC earbuds, all right? If I have ANC, broadband noise reduction around 25 dB, and I still listen 13 dB above the noise level, it's all right. I'm listening at a safe level now. 83 dB is almost 16 hours, okay? So The first big feature that really impacted hearing in true wireless earbuds is ANC. And ANC is almost universal today in earbuds that are, say, 100 euros and up. It's very difficult to find earbuds in that price range that don't have ANC. So becoming more and more popular, and this should have a profound impact on people's hearing over time when listening to music in a loud setting. Now, that's rather limited if you just have an ANC earbud. There are times when you don't want the ANC. There are times when it's loud and you don't necessarily want full ANC. If I'm walking down the street and trucks are rumbling by, it can be pretty loud too. And yet I'm on the street, I don't want the whole world to be silent. I want to hear where the cars are coming from, or if somebody with a bicycle is riding up behind me, for example. And this is where you start to get into some advanced features. Those are the kinds of things that require longer wear. I'm not just putting them on the metro and then taking them off when my commute is finished. I'm going to wear them when I leave the house, when I go to the station, when I get on the metro, when I get out and I walk down the street a few blocks to my office, and maybe even in my office where I connect to the computer and do some internet meetings. But all that requires long wear, and long wear requires comfort. And I mean comfort holistically. We can break it down like this. If we take first level, it's all about the hardware. It's that relationship between power consumption of the DSP, battery life, size and configuration of the earbud. There's always a juggle because long life, bigger battery, okay? And then it gets less comfortable. A lot of earbuds you can wear fine for a couple hours, but after a few hours, they really start to bother your ears. You want to take them out. So that's key to long wear, that hardware relationship. And DSP powers are going down and down. And there's always a balance. Processor power is going down, more features, larger or dual core DSPs are going in, then the power goes up again. So there's a little bit of a juggle, but this whole logjam is about to break in the next 2 or 3 generations where you can get some serious processor power available while still keeping the power consumption down. So now you get to the software side. What are the things that prevent people from wearing earbuds out and about all over? Or I should say, what are the things that are needed in order to enable people to do that? And I would say there's one clear voice for phone calls. If I'm going to do phone calls or internet meetings in different environments, my voice has to be clear. The other 3 are hearing related. And that's natural ambient sound. Okay, your ears hear immersively. Well, your earbuds have to allow you to continue to hear immersively. I remember getting an early earbud, wireless earbuds that had ambient awareness, and I said, I'm going to take them out for a run and see how they sound. So I'm listening to some music and I'm running and I hear a car coming. I can't tell where it's coming from. I'm swiveling around, oh, over there. Because they've completely lost the immersive hearing ability that my native ears had. So if you're going to go out and about, you're going to hear things, you're going to interact with people, the sound has to be natural and immersive. ANC has to migrate to adaptive ANC. In other words, on those times like when I'm on the street, I want the loud sounds of the street muted, but I still want that ambient awareness. I want to hear what's going on around me. And furthermore, I don't want to have to tweak the ANC for every situation I walk in. If I'm on the street, I want it to know it. If I walk into a restaurant, I want it to know it, and I want those things to adjust themselves. That's entirely becoming possible, and in fact, it's becoming reality. I'll show you some examples. And then there's reduced occlusion. If you have too much occlusion, that's the sound you get if you put your fingers in your ears and talk or chew, where you hear that sound rattling around in your ear. If you have an occluded earbud, you're not going to find it comfortable. Every footstep rattles in your brain. Or if you're at a restaurant, every time you chew on something, you can't hear the person talking because of the occlusion. So the occlusion problem has to be solved. So these 3 things not only enable long wear, but they make it more attractive to wear earbuds for a long time. If I've got good adaptive ANC, I really like it because I can go from loud environment to different loud environment, to quiet environment, to an internet meeting, and my ANC system is adapting to me. That's actually a more pleasant experience than going with open ears. So these are sorts of things that are both necessary for a long-wearing earbud, and also attractive when you have one. So call quality is an interesting one because people have been trying to do it with microphones for a long time. It's finally starting to get to a really good place because of the advent of bone vibration sensors. So many of you know about bone conduction earphones, like the shocks that you can put on. So you can have completely open ears and hear your ambient while getting music. It's great for sport, for example, where you're actually vibrating the bones of your skull and the sound is transmitted through your skull to your ears rather than through the air. Well, now there are very tiny vibration sensors that do that as well. So what you can do is you can actually have the combination of your own voice being picked up from skull vibrations combined with the outside microphones, and that allows the earphones to supply really good, clean audio because the loud sounds out there aren't picked up by the bone conduction device. You still need the combination because the bone conduction device is a little bit weak on spectrum. In other words, the treble rolls off too soon from the bone conduction device to get really good voice quality. But most of the noise out there is at lower frequencies within the range of the bone conduction device. So you can reject the outside sounds and keep the voice. And it's spectacularly good with wind. So by these methods, you can get really good call quality. So you can actually sit at an outdoor cafe and have an internet meeting and you sound really good. Because you think about it, when I go back to that study about people, if they can't hear well, they're less attentive and they remember less of what you said. Well, if you're hosting an internet meeting, you want to be understood, you want people to engage, right? You want to make an impact on people, your voice quality better be good. And so that's becoming entirely possible now. Same thing with ambient. Early ambient systems were both weak on treble and also weak on immersiveness, so that voices would sound muddy and you couldn't necessarily tell what direction sounds are coming from. That problem is rapidly being solved. Apple was, I think, the first one to really get it right. When the original AirPods Pro came out, I got a set and I gave them a try. I was actually walking around in the office and I was amazed at how realistic they sound. You'll actually appreciate this. Somebody came up and asked me, how's the ambient in those? I said, it's really realistic. I can hear perfectly clearly and I can tell what direction sounds are coming from, just like my hearing aids. And the person goes, your hearing aids have ambient awareness? Like, well, yeah, that's what they do. They enable you to hear the outside world. And hearing aids have gotten very, very good at being very realistic about the sound and its directionality. Now it's coming to earbuds as well. And that's really a necessary precursor for an all-day wear earbud. Then there's adaptive ANC. It's really going mainstream now. I think the first one, maybe not the very first one, but pretty early on for a well-known brand was Bose with their system. And it's gotten really good reviews for the adaptive nature of it. It's actually changing how much noise cancellation and how much ambient awareness is allowed, situationally based. And increasing use of machine learning is making this better and better. Hearing aid companies had the lead on this again. So mine, for example, have an automatic mode, which I leave on most of the time. It's only in really tough situations. Like I tweaked it, customized the settings for really loud restaurants just by playing around with the app until I got it the best possible. But it's getting better and better. The machine learning is used to analyze the audio scene. So they've actually characterized 10,000 different audio scenes, for example. All right, and via machine learning then, on the fly, the hearing aids are analyzing the sound scene and adjusting their settings accordingly. Okay, that's what's going on in earbuds now, or starting to, so that the ANC will adapt itself based on its analysis of the sound scene. Even with some simple techniques, I don't think Bose is doing it, but my hearing aids are doing it. They actually have an accelerometer in it. And I didn't appreciate it. My first set, I had them in automatic mode. We were in Vegas for CES, which especially during CES is as loud as it gets. And after dinner, we're walking down the street and all of a sudden I feel a tug on my collar. So one of my colleagues said, I called your name 3 times and you didn't answer. Your hearing aids have to be pretty lousy. Well, what they had done was they went into noise mode, so the microphones are beamforming forward and noise reduction is kicked in, so I didn't hear what was going on behind me. Well, the set I have now have an accelerometer. It's pretty interesting. If I'm walking, they'll go into 360 mode, even if it's loud. So for example, I'm walking down the strip and as I'm walking, it's in 360 mode. If I pop into some place and sit down, it'll go into restaurant mode because the accelerometer is feeding the ML system. Am I moving or sitting still? These are all things that are now possible to do in true wireless earbuds. And then it's hard to talk about true wireless earbuds without talking about Apple because, I mean, they really are innovating in this space. And when Apple does something, they put the stamp of approval on it. And by putting the stamp of approval on it, whole ecosystems develop to serve the non-Apple market. And so they've announced this for the 2nd generation of AirPods Pro. I'm going to play this because they do a great job describing the value of their new adaptive ANC system.
Adaptive audio dynamically blends transparency and active noise cancellation to match the conditions of your surroundings. So you can stay present within your environment while distracting noises are automatically reduced. And now, with personalized volume, we use machine learning to understand your listening preferences over time, together with the outside conditions, to deliver the best media experience for you in the moment. We are also adding an incredible new way to engage with others around you while wearing AirPods Pro. Just start speaking, and conversation awareness will automatically lower your music, focus on the voices in front of you, and reduce background noise.
Hey, Corey.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Are you going to be at the C141278 meeting later?
Definitely, I'll be there.
Awesome. I've got something I'd love to run by you.
Look forward to it.
See you there.
See ya.
Pretty nice, huh? Even though I'm an Android user, I actually have a burner iPhone that I use for testing iOS apps, and I have the original AirPods Pro, but I'm going to have to spring for the new ones just to try this out. Now, as I said, when Apple does something, ecosystems grow up around it. And there are now companies also, other companies like this one, Avatronics, who's developing machine learning-based ANC systems so that it's possible to do this in other earbuds as well. Because of this innovation ecosystem, you don't have to have the budget of a Sony or a Bose or an Apple to get this done, which is really nice because this is a very useful feature that can go into a lot of earbuds. The interesting thing is they don't talk about hearing protection at all. They talk about giving you the best media experience. So it's almost stealthy what they're doing here. That's been their approach to hearing all along. They made that conversation boost feature where you can focus the microphones, but they don't really talk about it. And it's the same thing here. They talk about beamforming microphones only in the context of being able to hear somebody while you're wearing the earbuds. But then there's actual hearing assistance. And when we talk about hearing assistance, everybody wants to talk about over-the-counter hearing aids, the legislation that is almost at its first anniversary in the United States. But I actually believe that non-regulated hearing assistance in earbuds is going to be more popular than OTC hearing aids. Because when you say hearing aid, it evokes the stigma that people feel. And in the early going, you can see it because adoption rates for OTC hearing aids not very high. But if you do this in an ordinary earbud, you actually reduce the stigma. Now, the interesting thing is, for the first time, it appeared on Qualcomm's survey. Now, you see, not very many people, 16% of people, but still, that's a lot considering this was published towards the end of last year. And so the survey actually precedes OTC hearing aids being released. Yet you have 16% of the people using them for more than an hour. That's probably mostly conversation boost from AirPods because that was released about a year sooner. So it's already something that people are trying out and using to a certain extent, even without publicity. So it's really, I think, a very untapped need right now. Conversation boost, meaning doing nothing more than beamforming microphones, actually doesn't work too badly. If you do the beamforming microphones, this is according to the National Acoustics Labs, which is a well-known research organization in Australia. They actually measured the impact, and they got about 5 dB improvement in speech to noise by turning on the conversation boost, and another dB or so if you put in their noise reduction, which is basically some acoustic filtering to try and knock out some of the background. So between 5 and 7 dB improvement is meaningful. It really works, and this is the sort of thing you can do today, but it's really just the beginning. It's another one of those where doing beamforming microphones can be pretty complicated. It's difficult to get it right because the two microphones in an earbud are pretty close together and the microphones have to be properly matched. A lot of things to make that work properly. But again, there are more companies doing it. I'll highlight this one, Nuance Hearing. They actually did, Starkey, the American hearing aid brand, has a table mic that you can put like in the middle of a conference room table and it will dynamically beamform on whoever's speaking. Well, they did it. And they also did, if any of you saw this, Luxottica, which is the eyeglass brand, who makes a lot of the brands you know, like they, for example, make Ray-Bans, that's theirs. They introduced or pre-announced hearing aid glasses where there's a microphone array, and Nuance Hearing did the beamforming mics for them. Actually, as a result, Luxottica bought them, but they're still also working in other areas. So there are companies like this one who are experts at beamforming and can do beamforming microphones for people who are not Apple. So again, I think this is one of those things where it's not only possible to do, but it's going to become more and more interesting to meet that unmet need. And the unmet need is actually large because we talk about people with age-related hearing loss could use beamforming microphones to substitute or ameliorate their age-related hearing loss and help them hear better in restaurants. But there's actually a vast number of people who don't have hearing loss but still have trouble hearing. Hearing aids won't do anything for these people because there's no correction to be dialed in. Again, the National Acoustic Labs, they looked at just the United States and they saw 25 million people who report hearing problems, typically in noise, but don't have hearing loss. So if you consider the US has about 5% of the world's population, and you put that against 25 million people, there's a lot of people who would love a little hearing assistance in loud places. And ultimately, beamforming microphones can only get you so far, like that 5 dB you saw with Apple. But on the horizon are machine learning techniques to actually separate out the speech from noise. Now, at this moment, it can be done where larger processors are available. So for example, the company Augmented Hearing that I'm about to demonstrate, they're doing it for the Greater Copenhagen Fire Department. Every emergency call that comes in, the person who answers the call can turn on this system. So if it's really loud where the person's calling in the emergency, in order to be able to hear that person better, they can kick this in, but they've got basically PC processor. It's down to being able to run on an iPhone, which is the demo that I have here that I'm going to play for you. And give it another generation or two of earbud processors, it'll work there too. Listen to the difference. Okay, so now I'm going to record using the voice recorder app. It's running now. We're waiting for the chainsaw to come back. There it goes. The chainsaw is running about 80 dB. I'll double check it again. It was 80 earlier when I tried it, but now I'm going to do it and measure it again. So that's with the recording going and the chainsaw running full blast. Okay, so now I'm going to record using the voice recorder app. It's running now. We're waiting for the chainsaw to come back. There it goes. The chainsaw is running about 80 dB. I'll double check it again. It was 80 earlier when I tried it, but now I'm going to do it and measure it again. So that's with the recording going and the chainsaw running full blast. Pretty amazing, don't you think? Imagine what that gets in an earbud. And what I like about this, you can think of it as another ANC mode. We don't have to have the hearing loss discussion here. We've just added a mode to ANC. And that makes it really attractive for all those people who struggle to hear in loud places and start to disengage because of it. There's now a solution coming for them, which can be part of an advanced true wireless earbud. The big challenge is almost reverse stigma, because all the messages, including that Apple ad or Apple announcement I just played, are all about isolating yourself, really. I mean, this is today's Apple AirPods Pro advertisement, in which a person's walking down the street in different ways and their ANC system is isolating them from everything. You think about it, you'll see people wearing devices like AirPods on the street all the time. But if they go in a social setting, it creates kind of a negative vibe. If I go up and start talking to people while I'm wearing AirPods, people are a little bit turned off by it, because all the messaging have been around these earbuds are for consumption. They're to make your consumption experience better. Now, there are some moves to change that. Sennheiser did it. They have a device called Conversation Clear Plus, which is basically doing the beamforming microphones and that. And they actually had Dee Snider, who was with Twisted Sister, do an advertisement, which is actually hilarious. I'm not going to play it here for reasons of time, but you can actually go look it up, in which, because he can't hear the person across the table, they start singing really loud to each other, glasses shatter, this sort of thing, and then somebody walks up and gives them the Conversation Clear Plus, and they start engaging in conversation. It's all very good. It's a really funny commercial. But that's a sort of message that we're going to need more of to help break this reverse stigma. So I'm waiting with bated breath for Apple to go public with this sort of thing, because they really move markets. They have that kind of brand power. So do others like Sony, for example. So sooner or later, somebody's going to do it. It's just a matter of who's first. I really like to bet on Apple, because they're building all these features into their earbuds. They're just not talking about hearing. They're talking about other purposes. But it's all there. Will they break out? If they do, they're going to enable this whole market. And so I certainly hope they do, or someone like them does. Now, unrelated to hearing directly, but also equally interesting, is the mixed reality audio experience that's coming through the new Bluetooth standard and Auracast, which is the broadcast Bluetooth. So right now, Bluetooth is 1-to-1. Only one device can stream to this earbud at a time. Auracast is a broadcast mode. It's a little bit like a radio. So when you're broadcasting Auracast, 10 or 50 or 100 people can tune into that channel and listen to the audio. So that enables a lot of really interesting experience. The first one I think of is a sports bar. You've got 10 TVs around the room and they're all silent. You're sitting over there and you want to hear the sound for the match over there, you just tune into that channel and you're getting the audio streamed to your ears. I can actually do this now. There's an app called Tunity in the United States, where if you point the camera at a TV screen, it will recognize what you're watching and stream the audio. These hearing aids will do mixed reality audio. I can stream to them and I can change the mix between all streaming, all ambient, or anything in between. So I've actually done this where I've gone to a sports bar, captured the channel, started it streaming, and put them about, say, 40% ambient because it's loud in there and 60% streaming, and I can talk to the people around the table with me and get the sound from the television from the match that's on the other end of the bar. So that's coming for everybody, and not with something special like an app. When Auracast gets deployed, you can have multiple channels going at the same time. And so I expect this will actually become part of the earbud wearing experience. It's a little bit longer term. I think it's going to take some years before you see broad deployment of Auracast, but definitely coming, so that you can have a mixed reality experience in all different settings. And then we come to biometrics. Biometrics is probably one of the most oldest thing talked about with respect to earbuds. I mean, this article is not that old, 2019, talking about how ear is the future of biometrics. And if you look at even, for example, Under Armour did a collaboration with JBL, and that was 2016, where they put a heart rate monitor in the earbud. Problem is, these things so far have only been used very situationally. You can see not very popular, and even the people who are using it for short intervals. For example, sport. But it's kind of a vicious cycle because people don't wear their earbuds for very long. There isn't much value in having biometrics in your ear, except for these very specific circumstances like running. So if biometrics in the earbud are to be widely adopted, it really requires two things. You have to get valuable measurements from the ear, especially things that are differentiated from what you can get on your watch. Watch is already an all-day device. I can get my heart rate off my watch. So there's really no value in stuffing a heart rate sensor in my ear. It's more valuable to have sensors in your ear that can't be replicated on the list. And you need earbuds that are otherwise being worn for longer and longer periods of time. Now again, there's an ecosystem of devices being built to address biometrics in the ear that have unique value. Cosinus is a German company, and what they do really well is body temperature. You can't get body temperature off the wrist, but you can accurately get body temperature from within the ear. And so that's their specialty, and they're doing a lot of interesting things there. They can also do heart rate, and they can do blood oxygen level, but of course those are things that can come from the watch, but the temperature is unique. So getting body temperature from the ear is something that has its own value. Now, this company is really interesting because they're actually listening to the sounds of your heart acoustically. They're actually listening at subaudible frequencies using the existing ANC microphone that's already in there facing your ear canal. So it actually does not require another sensor at all. Now, the interesting thing is, because they're listening acoustically versus an optical sensor in your ear, they're actually listening to the sounds of your body's core. So when you do optical sensor, PPG sensor in your ear, you're just catching the blood flow just below the surface of the skin. They're actually listening to your heart and the sounds that are being made as the heart flows through your valves and that sort of thing. So they can do a whole new level of measurement, not only heart rate, but heart rate variability, which is a good indicator of stress rate. And they're also getting good at picking up different sounds. They can, for example, hear the sound if you've got a heart valve that's bad, so that you're getting blood flowing back into the heart. They can hear that. Like a doctor with a stethoscope, they can hear that in the earbud. And so this is one of those advanced techniques I think is going to really bring value to biometrics in the ear. And then there's actually listening to your voice and picking up conditions based on your voice, both at the moment and over time. So for example, you can recognize through machine learning the difference between a dry cough and a cough when you have a respiratory illness. Can also pick up stress, and over the long term, you can also detect signs of cognitive decline through the way you vocalize. And again, this doesn't require any other sensors at all. It requires listening with the microphones and feeding it into the ML hopper. So these are the sorts of things that can be done. And this technically isn't, I guess you could call it biometrics, but it's the ability to measure a person's total sound dose over time. So you can see, for example, if you have an Apple Watch, it'll tell you if you're in a loud situation, that sort of thing. But it works on the ambient. This is a system that will actually listen to what the speakers are playing in your ear, or measure what the speakers are playing in your ear, and give you accumulated dosage reports. So if I, for example, go to a loud concert for a couple hours, and I just kind of max it out, right? So in other words, I listen for 2 hours at, that would be, according to NIOSH, 91 dB. If I listen to 91 dB, I have 2 hours. But then I've got to be careful about what I do the rest of the day, not to blow through the daily limit and just notch up that hearing loss, a little bit. And so by accumulating the dose, you can get advice on your listening habits and what you should do. And a quiet day, great. You've been quiet all day in the evening, you want to crank it up a little bit? It's fine, and this will tell you it's fine. You've been working in a loud environment all day, it's going to tell you be careful about your listening in the evening if you listen to music. So another really useful feature. But when we talk about biometrics in the ear, we also have to have an ecosystem discussion, because it's not enough just to have numbers thrown at you. All right, if I've got pulse rate, all right, when I'm running, I'm concerned about my pulse rate. Any other time of the day, just looking at the number doesn't tell me anything. I need the measurements turned into actionable insights. And I see this playing out in two different ways. One is with specific use cases by individual brands. I'll give two examples here. Headspace is a popular mindfulness app, and it has a lot of routines you can use and so on. Well, imagine an earbud that's reporting stress level to the app. Think of a guided meditation, for example, which is actually adjusting the routine in real time depending on your stress level. Okay, very useful application for biometrics in the ear. Or Clue is an app that helps people track their menstrual cycles. And today it's all based on user input, especially if the person is irregular. This will help make a better prediction of when they're going to menstruate or when they're going to ovulate based on their input, because your inputs should be similar as you approach those parts of the cycle, but it's all based on user input. Well, there are slight variations in body temperature that go with the monthly cycle. If you can track those accurately enough, you can feed real useful information to improve the accuracy of the Clue system. So these are specific cases where in-ear biometrics could be really interesting and useful. But ultimately, I think ecosystems are where the maximum benefit's going to come. Right now, Apple's the only one that's really a long way towards developing an health ecosystem. I expect if they really break that out and make AirPods part of the system, then you're going to see other players. Android would be a natural to do this, because the best insights and the best data come when you're getting data from different sources. I can get data from my watch. I can get data from my hearables. If I have a smart bed, I can get data from the bed. If I wear, the sleep band, I get data from the sleep band. All those together combine to give you even more insights than you get from any one biosensor alone. So I think that's the longer term future of where biometrics are going, but may very well be preceded by some of these specific applications like the ones I gave as an example. And we'll wrap it up by talking about voice. There was a great deal of excitement about voice assistants in the ear. Does anybody remember the movie Her? Scarlett Johansson was the voice assistant. Everybody thought this was coming when Amazon introduced Alexa. But as it turns out, today's voice systems, which are just what's called single turn, meaning there's no memory. You give it a command or ask it a question, it gives you an answer, and the next thing you say, you start from zero again. Not very interesting in the mobile environment. Voice really has to be contextual, and it has to be intelligent. Where am I now? What am I doing? What time of day is it? And then you have to be able to have, a repeated discussion with your voice assistant. Otherwise, it doesn't work. All of the previous attempts, Echo Buds fell flat on their face because they went with a voice-first kind of sell. Google was all over it. CES 2020, you couldn't walk anywhere without tripping over a Google something or other. I swear that, in a steak restaurant, they would brand Google into the steak. They were everywhere pushing Google's voice system. And it went nowhere. They actually backed off of it in time because of the limitations of the voice systems today. Now you have large language models. And in mobile and context, they're actually getting pretty good. I've got Bing Chat on my phone, and you can have a conversation with it. I can do things like say, how many sports bars are within walking distance? And it'll say there's so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. Do any of those have stout on tap? yes, this one has so-and-so stout on tap. You can actually have a repeated, a conversation in which it remembers what you said before. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting there. And now Google is getting in the game as well. So it may finally come that voice is useful and interesting, and another reason why people would put earbuds in their ears for a long time, and therefore enabling other applications that require long wear. We'll have to see how this plays out, but it also feeds into this idea of clear voice. One of the problems with using Google Assistant in the mobile environment is that if the voice is not clear, it doesn't understand you, it gets frustrating in a hurry. So for example, if I'm out on the street there, I do this all the time. Like the first time I came here from the hotel, I walked over here yesterday, I put the direction in Google Maps, pocketed my phone, and had the walking instructions fed to my ears. And again, mixed reality, I had it half and half. I could hear the voice, but I could hear the street sounds. But if I tap my ear twice, I can wake up Google Assistant. And if I try to do it when I'm out on the street, it won't understand what I'm saying. Because the voice pickup in a noisy environment from these hearing aids isn't that clear. So clear voice is another thing that's going to enable this. With a modern clear voice system, I can talk to Google Assistant out on the street and it will understand me first time. So that combination is going to make this more and more useful as well. So if I were to sum it up, where hearables are going, even though the different things we've talked about will occur at different rates, the fact that some of these are enabling longer wear are then going to enable the others so that you'll see these things coming in time. So think about it. Would you wear a device that personalizes the streaming audio so you'll hear it well, has EQ that's dependent on the listening level, adaptive intelligent ANC that adjusts itself no matter where you are, the ambient sound being very natural, sounds like your own ears or maybe even better. You have hearing assistance, so when you walk into a loud pub or restaurant, you can hear people around the table really well. And you've got the mixed reality audio, so when you go to the airport, you can tune into the desk, or when you go to the sports bar, you can listen to the match. And then throw into that health monitoring that's really useful, and the AI voice assistant. If they're light and small and comfortable, wouldn't you wear those all day? There are so many useful use cases that come with it. And that's where I think the future of hearables is headed. So thank you.